Tell all the truth, but tell it slant, by Emily Dickinson, 1872. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. Like lightning to the children eased, with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. When the history of American poetry was reevaluated and rewritten in the mid-20th century, a curious thing happened. The poets who were most beloved by 19th century audiences, poets like James Russell Lowell and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, were deemed not worth remembering, and more obscure poets who had published no poems at all during their lifetime sometimes, became seen as central to the tradition. This was especially the case for Emily Dickinson. Though Dickinson lived and wrote in Massachusetts in the mid to late 19th century, few outside of her family knew of her at all until after her death in the 1890s, when her poems began to appear in print. Over the next few decades, over 1,700 of Dickinson's poems were published, many heavily edited to standardize her very unique punctuation. Since the 1950s, an editorial battle has raged regarding the proper punctuation and sequencing of Dickinson's poems. But one thing is clear to all, that Dickinson was a first-rate poet of rare expression and linguistic genius. Tell all the truth is characteristic of Dickinson: short lines, crisp rhymes, and scintillating diction. Like Shakespeare, Dickinson's command of the English language is so complete that she can use a simple term like slant or eased, and so reorient that word's sense and significance that ever after we feel ourselves that that word has changed in relationship to us, that it will always be meaning to us more richly than other words, that it will always be receiving life and value from its source in Dickinson's verse. Though her early editors tried to give names to her poems, Dickinson herself did not name them, so it has been conventional to use the first line or phrase to refer to them. Thus, the reference to this poem as Tell All the Truth, or Tell All the Truth but Tell It Slant. Scholars think that the poem was written around 1872. Thomas Johnson, in the 50s, labeled it poem 1129, though this has been amended by R.W. Franklin. Christiane Miller and others have argued for an alternate ordering of Dickinson's poems based on how she stitched her little notebooks of poetry or fascicles together. But one of the things that makes the dating and sorting of Tell All the Truth particularly difficult is that it was not included in a notebook or fascicle, but written on a loose scrap of paper. So Christiane Miller includes it in her section on loose papers. Here's what we do know about the poem. It is a poem of 8 lines, rhyming A, B, C, B, D, E, F, E. The lines alternate between a loose iambic tetrameter in the odd lines and iambic trimeter in the even lines. This is the traditional hymn meter, and Dickinson wrote a majority of her poems in this meter. Though Dickinson broke up 8-line and 12-line poems often into distinct stanzas of 4 and 4, this poem is not broken up into stanzas in its original form, though some editors, especially in the early 20th century, tried to break it up into 2 quatrains, but it's one stanza of 8 lines, actually. Let's think for a moment about Dickinson's sounds. The first line, Tell all the truth but tell it slant, is filled with T sounds, both beginning and ending with the letter T, and placing T sounds at the beginning of the second and third stressed syllable. Tell all the truth but tell it slant. In the second line, the S sound, set up by the word slant, takes over. Success in circuit lies. Like in the first line, the second line begins and ends with the same letter, S, as does the third line, in fact. Woven between the sibilant S sounds in the second line are hard C sounds. Success, circuit. F sounds enter among the T's in the third line, and in the fourth line, Dickinson brings back the S sounds, but now weaves in B and P sounds. Superb, surprise. The fifth line picks up the L at the end of line 2, lies, and repeats it in like lightning. New K sounds also enter with this line too, and are extended into explanation kind. The Z's of dazzle stand out in the penultimate line, before the strong double B's of the last line with be blind. Dickinson's word usage is notable as well. She's famous for favoring long Latin words in her short poems, and here we have several wonderful examples with circuit, superb, surprise, explanation, and gradually. Notably, explanation takes up a full 4 syllables of a 6-syllable line. But the other 2 words in that line, with and kind, are short Anglo-Saxon words, which contrast well with the complex multisyllabic word explanation. Probably the most significant word in this poem is slant, a word that has become emblematic not just of Dickinson's poem, but of Dickinson's whole approach to poetry, even the whole approach to American literature that Dickinson promoted in general. Dickinson's opening line, "Tell all the truth but tell it slant," has come to be understood as a statement of her own poetics. It consists of 2 parts. First, tell all the truth. The whole truth is what the poet tells, not just part of the truth or a single element of the truth. This is a high calling. We ought not to leave anything out of our truth-telling, Dickinson suggests. But now comes the second part. Tell it slant. The truth should all be told, but at an angle, from the side, even backward. For slant contains the consonants of tell, but backwards. You have T and L in tell and L and T in slant. Slant is a backward telling or a reverse telling or an alt telling, but it is not a mistelling or a deceiving. All the truth can and should be told, but slantwise. Knowing that her first line seems like a paradox, Dickinson spends the rest of the poem explaining herself. First, she uses the concept of a circuit, of going around in order to arrive where we want, in order to succeed. With a sort of wink, Dickinson says that success lies in circuit. For lies, meaning to reside in, is also a homonym of lies, meaning to deceive, the opposite of the truth. In fact, there's a momentary ambiguity in the second line, for it can be read to mean that in circuit, success deceives. But the rest of the poem clarifies that lies should not be read as deceives, but as resides in. In lines 3 and 4, Dickinson introduces a truth as light analogy, which will predominate for the rest of the poem. The surprise of truth is too bright for us, not too bright for our eyes exactly, but for our infirm delight. Our faculty of delight is weak or ill or untutored, and the shock of truth will easily overwhelm it. In lines 5 and 6, Dickinson gives us an example of light that overwhelms, namely lightning. But she also brings back in the epistemic element. It is not so much that the physical flash of lightning is a problem, but that the mystery of lightning is the problem. It demands an explanation. The explanation of lightning that we give to children is a kind one, or at least should be. Like the term lies, kind has 2 main denotations. First, meaning gentle, benevolent. and the second denoting kinship or likeness. The explanation of lightning is both. It is a gentle, loving explanation, for the frightened child has just had the shock of lightning, and kindness is needed to soothe them. But the explanation, if it is actually slant, is also one in which the adult helps the child understanding lightning through its kinship, its likeness with other things, its analogues. Thus, Dickinson points toward the whole reason for figurative language in literature in general. Lightning is like other things, and when we describe likenesses, we are engaging in a fundamental activity of poetry, of literary art. What are the stakes of such an enterprise? Well, Dickinson describes them in her final 2 lines. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man will be blind. Without the slant telling, without the explanation kind, our minds will be overwhelmed, blinded, deadened. At the heart of this poem, then, is an epistemological aesthetics, a theory of art that takes into account the vagaries of human knowing. We might also call this an American aesthetics. For as we said at the beginning, Americans after Dickinson have taken up the banner of slantness. By my count, there is an American literary press called Slant, which produces some great books, a popular guide to creative writing by Brenda Miller and Suzanne Antonetta called Tell It Slant, an anthology of poetry, I think it's 90s poetry, edited by Mark Wallace and Stephen Marks, called Telling It Slant, and there is, unsurprisingly, a Tell It Slant book festival in Dickinson's hometown of Amherst, which is taking place this September. Though she was little known in her lifetime, Dickinson has emerged as one of our most important, most beloved, and most often quoted, as we see from what I just said, poets in all of our history. She is sly, she's arresting, she is elegant, she is a worthy sister to Lazarus, Wheatley, and Bradstreet before her. And she proved an example for the great American poets of the 20th century yet to come after.